The silence of deep space was broken only by the faint hum of Ethan Cole's cargo hauler. The silver wind was old, slow, and patched together with more repairs than he could count. The stars outside were cold pinpricks in an endless black ocean. He leaned back in his seat, boots propped on the console, sipping recycled coffee that tasted like bitter metal. Another long haul, another lonely trip. Then, without warning, the hum of his ship changed. A deep vibration ran through the hull, making the coffee ripple in his cup. Red lights flared across his control panel. The proximity alarm screamed in his ears. Ethan sat upright, eyes scanning the radar. There was nothing there a moment ago. And now, a massive blip filled the entire display. It wasn't possible. Nothing could appear that close without his sensors catching it, unless it was cloaked. He glanced out the VIEWPOR and froze. A ship the size of a small city hung in the darkness ahead. Its hull shimmered like molten metal, twisting and rippling. In patterns that made his eyes ache to follow, dozens of jagged towers jutted from its surface, each one glowing faintly from within.
Massive engines.
The size of apartment buildings burned with a cold blue flame. He knew that design. Everyone in the trade routes did, Vorath Syndicate. Pirates, smugglers, mercenaries, and worse. No one crossed them and lived. Ethan's first thought was to turn and run. His second thought was that running wouldn't matter. That thing could. Swat his little freighter out of the void without slowing down. A voice cut into his cums. Deep and rough, like stone grinding against metal. Human vessel's silver wind. Power down your engines. Prepare to be boarded. Ethan's hands hovered. Over the controls, his mind screamed at him to run. But his gut told him the truth. If they'd gone to the trouble of decloaking right in front of him, escape wasn't an option. He killed the engines. The Vorath warship moved closer, its bulk swallowing his view of the stars. A docking arm extended. From its side, a massive mechanical limb ending in a claw-like grip. It latched onto his hauler with a shudder that rattled every bolt in the hull. His airlock lights shifted from green to red, indicating an override. They were coming aboard. Ethan grabbed the small blaster he kept under his seat. It wasn't much just. A cheap defense weapon bought in a backwater station. Against Vorath tech, it was little more than a flashlight. Still holding it made him feel less helpless. The airlock cycled. The door slid open with a hiss. A figure filled the doorway, Captain. Koresh. Foon. Ethan recognized him instantly from the Trade Network's warning bulletins. The Vorath captain was enormously 7 feet tall, with armor that looked grown. Rather than built, a living black carapace streaked with silver veins. 4 eyes, 2 small and sharp above 2 larger molten gold ones, studied him with slow, deliberate care. The captain carried no weapon Ethan could see, but his very presence radiated danger. Behind him, 2 Vorath enforcers stepped into the hauler. They were smaller than their captain, but still far bigger than Ethan. Their movements sharp and predatory. Ethan Cole, Koresh said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate in the air. Pilot, smuggler, debt to the Mornock Guild. Survived the Helix 12 blockade. Efficient under pressure. Reckless when cornered. Ethan swallowed. I didn't know I was famous. You are not, Koresh said flatly. But you are useful. I'm guessing you're not here to offer me a reward, Ethan said. Koresh's head tilted slightly, the golden eyes narrowing. Join my crew. The words landed like cold metal in Ethan's stomach. He blinked. What? You will serve on my vessel, Koresh said, effective immediately. Ethan barked out a laugh before he could stop himself. Yeah, that's not happening. I've got my own ship, my own cargo, and I'm not looking for a new boss. Especially not one who Koresh raised one clawed hand and Ethan's voice caught in his throat. Refusal is permitted, the captain said slowly, but not without consequence. The Vorath enforcer to Koresh's left tapped a control. On his wrist, a holographic image appeared in the air between them. It was a colony station. Ethan recognized it immediately. Haven Reach. A small settlement orbiting a gas giant 2 sectors away. Koresh's voice dropped lower. In 4 standard days, A Dravik raiding fleet will attack this colony. The Vorith will not interfere unless I order it. That order will depend on you. Ethan's mouth went dry. You're saying if I don't join you? Koresh cut him off. They will burn. Every family. Every child. The image of Haven Reach flickered, replaced with a simulation of fire and debris, structures breaking apart in a silent storm of destruction. Ethan's hand tightened on his blaster. Why me? You've got a ship full of killers. What could I possibly give you that they can't? Koresh's gaze didn't waver. Humans are different. Your kind reacts without the hesitation of others. You make choices when logic says there is no choice. You fight when all other species would surrender. Sometimes, his golden eyes glinted. You win. Ethan stared back, trying to read the alien's face, but the Vorith were too alien to read. He felt like a mouse being studied by a hawk. I'm not a soldier, Ethan said. You are alive, Koresh replied. That is enough. One of the enforcers stepped forward and held out a small metal device, a Vorath crew implant, used to interface with their ships. Once attached, it marked you as part of the crew. Removing it meant death. Ethan's instinct screamed at him to refuse, to fight, to do anything but step onto that monster's ship. But the image of Haven Reach burned in his mind. He had friends. There are people who trusted him. You're asking me to gamble my life, Ethan said. Koresh's mandibles twitched, a gesture that might have been a smile. I am telling you, there is no gamble. You will die someday. This way, perhaps, it will matter. Ethan looked at the device in the enforcer's clawed hand. He thought of the colony. He thought of running, but knew he couldn't. He took the device. Koresh turned and stepped back, toward the airlock. Bring him, he ordered. The enforcers guided Ethan into the docking arm. The moment he crossed into the Vorath warship, he felt the air change, heavier, thicker, carrying a faint metallic Thames. The corridors were vast, lined with strange markings that pulsed faintly like veins beneath skin. The ship felt alive. Other crew members turned to watch him as they passed. Some had eyes that glowed, others skin like polished stone, others long-spined limbs that clicked as they moved. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to open hostility. No one spoke. Koresh led them into a massive chamber at the ship's heart. A great circular viewport dominated one wall, showing the black expanse of space and the distant shimmer of stars. Consoles were arranged in a ring, operated by aliens of at least 6 different species. In the center, a raised platform held the captain's command chair. This, Koresh said, gesturing to the chamber, is your new home. Ethan forced a smirk. Looks cozy. Koresh ignored the comment. You will work. We'll learn. And when the time comes, you will act. Till then, do not wander where you are not permitted. The ship has ways of dealing with trespassers. Ethan didn't ask what that meant. Koresh turned away, speaking in a language Ethan didn't understand. The enforcers escorted him out, down a side corridor, and into a small cabin with a narrow bed, storage locker, and a single dim light. The door sealed behind him. Ethan sat on the bed and stared at the implant on his wrist. The Vorath markings glowed faintly. He was trapped, but as he leaned back against the wall, one thought refused to leave his mind. Koresh hadn't told him everything. The way the captain had looked at him wasn't just about bravery or unpredictability. There was something else, something hidden. And whatever it was, Ethan knew it was going to get him killed. The Silver Wind was long gone now, left drifting in the shadow of the Vorath warship as the salvage crew moved to tow it away. Ethan Cole stood in the center of an alien corridor that seemed to breathe around him. The walls pulsed faintly, veins of silver light snaking under dark chitin-like plating. It felt less like a ship and more like the inside of something alive. Vorath enforcers flanked him as they marched deeper inside. The air was thick with a metallic temps that clung to his tongue, and the faint vibration beneath his boots told him the engines were active. Every so often, they passed a viewport, and Ethan caught glimpses of space outside, black, endless, scattered with distant, cold stars. But the real pressure came from the eyes. Crew members stopped what they were doing to watch him pass. Some were Vorathdal, armored, with predatory movements, but others were stranger still. One had translucent skin with dark shapes moving beneath, like something alive was swimming inside his body. Another had no mouth, just a smooth oval of bone-like plating where a face should be. A tall, insectoid being clicked its mandibles together when Ethan met its gaze. They all stared, some with curiosity, some with something sharper-hunger. One Vorath, with a scar splitting its top right, I muttered something in their guttural language. Ethan didn't understand the words, but he caught the tone. It wasn't friendly. The enforcers didn't stop until they reached a large chamber with a heavy, ribbed door. It slid open with a hiss, and Ethan found himself stepping into what looked like a common area. You ignored the fact that every table, every bench, every drinking vessel seemed made from bone, metal, and something that looked disturbingly like petrified flesh. The room went silent when he entered. A large, broad-shouldered alien at the nearest table slowly rose to its feet. Its skin was dull gray, ridged and cracked like old stone, and each finger ended in a hooked claw. It looked Ethan over from head to toe and then said something in halting galactic trade tongue. Human. The word came out like it tasted bad. Ethan forced himself not to step back. Yeah, that's me. The alien's lipless mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. We had one before. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Had alien's yellow eyes narrowed, did not last. Before Ethan could answer, a low, resonant voice cut through the tension from behind him. Sit. Captain Koresh Vaughn stepped into the room. He didn't raise his voice, but the authority in it made the stone-skinned alien sit down without argument. The captain gestured to an empty bench at a table near the center. Ethan hesitated, then sat. This is my crew, Koresh said. Are loyal, efficient, dangerous? You will earn your place among them, or you will be replaced. A ripple of movement passed through the room, subtle, but Ethan caught it. Not all of them liked the idea of a human here. Koresh began introducing them, though Ethan doubted he'd remember all the names. There was Zur, the Vorath, weapons master with burn scars along both arms. Hekta, the insectoid navigator whose every movement made a faint clicking sound. Varith, the stone-skinned brute who had spoken to Ethan first, and others each stranger than the last, each with eyes that measured him like a weapon they weren't sure they trusted. As they ate, if you could call it, eating. Most of the food looked alive. Ethan felt a shift in the room. At first it was just glances in his direction, then murmured conversations in languages he didn't understand. Then the look started to change, less hostile, more. Where he hit, he caught Hekta staring at him for a long moment before the insectoid looked away. Sharply. Another crewman, a thin, pale alien with 6 eyes, muttered something and left the room entirely when Ethan glanced at him. It was subtle, but Ethan knew fear when he saw it. They weren't afraid of him because of what he'd done. They were afraid of him because of what they thought he might do. When the meal was over, Koresh stood. Tomorrow, you begin work. We'll shadow different crew until I decide your role. Do not disappoint me. Ethan stood as well. And if I do? Koresh's golden eyes locked on his. Then Haven reached Burns. The captain turned and left without another word. The enforcers escorted Ethan down a twisting corridor to a small cabin. The door slid shut behind him, and for the first time since boarding, he was alone. He sat on the narrow bed, staring at the dull metal walls. His mind replayed every look, every whisper from the crew.
They didn't want him here?
But they weren't trying to push him out. No, they were waiting for whatever it was they believed humans could do, and that scared him more than anything. The Vorath warship drifted through a dead stretch of space, its black hull blending into the void. Ethan Cole stood at one of the narrow viewports in the corridor outside the mess hall, watching distant points of light slide slowly past. It had been only a day since he'd been taken aboard, but already the ship's rhythm felt oppressive. The corridors hummed with life in a way that made him think of breathing. Every crew member he passed looked at him just a little too long, like they were trying to guess how long he would last. He didn't have long to think about it. A sharp tone blared through the ship low. Pulsing urgent, it wasn't an alarm. He recognized, but the effect was immediate. The dim silver veins running along the walls flared brighter, and crew members dropped what they were doing to rush toward stations. The deck under his feet vibrated with a deeper, faster pulse. One of the Vorath enforcers spotted him. Human bridge. Now. Ethan didn't argue. He followed the alien's long, heavy strides to the command chamber. The air felt thicker here. Charged with tension, Captain Koreshvan was already at his post, for eyes scanning data feeds projected into the air. The insectoid navigator hecked at her console. Sir, the weapons master, had his massive hands resting on a control board lined with spines instead of buttons. "What's going on?" Ethan asked. Koresh didn't look at him. Dravik Marauders. It's 2 ships. They were waiting in the asteroid belt ahead. Ethan frowned. "So go around." Koresh turned, the movement slow, deliberate. "We are Vorath. We do not go around prey. We cut through." Before Ethan could respond, Koresh gestured toward him. "You. Forward strike position." Ethan blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "I'm not you or human," Koresh said, as if that explained everything. "Take the rail platform to gunnery pod 3. Zor will guide you." Zor's heavy footsteps shook the deck as he approached. "Move," he growled. They descended, through winding corridors until they reached a narrow lift shaft. It carried them down toward the ship's forward section, where the hull narrowed into a jagged prow. The gunnery pod was a cramped sphere with a wraparound viewport and a single targeting rig. The seat's harness looked like it could crush a man if it locked too tight. Zor strapped him in, then activated the console. Alien glyphs scrolled across the screen, but a translated overlay appeared a second later. Target lock, shield status. Ammunition count. "You aim, you fire," Zur said. "Do not hesitate." "Right," Ethan muttered. "Because I totally know what I'm doing." The ship shuddered. Out the viewport, jagged shapes emerged from the shadows of tumbling asteroids, too. Sleek, predatory ships with hulls like polished obsidian. Red energy flared along their spines. "They're charging weapons," Ethan said. "Then kill them," Zor replied, already climbing out of the pod. "Or they will kill you." The hatch sealed, leaving Ethan alone. A bright flash lit the darkness. Outside one of the Dravik ships opening fire. The blast skimmed the Vorath shields, sending a tremor through the pod. Ethan gripped the controls. His pulse pounded in his ears. The targeting overlay blinked at him, guiding his aim. He tracked the first ship as it weaved between asteroids, its red weapons flaring again. He squeezed the trigger. A bolt of searing blue energy lanced out, catching the enemy ship on its port side. Shields flared and held, but the impact made it veer. The second ship swooped in from above. Ethan swung the turret, firing in short, sharp bursts. He wasn't sure if it was instinct or desperation, but his aim was sharper than he expected. They came in fast, weaving in a pattern that should have been impossible to track, but he tracked them anyway. He cut across their path, firing just ahead of where they'd be. The shot connected. Their shields collapsed in a flash, and the Vorath's main batteries finished the kill. The first ship broke off, trying to run. "Don't let them escape." Koresh's voice came through the calm, but edged with command. Ethan locked on, heart hammering, and fired. The enemy's hull split apart in a silent explosion. Fragments spinning away into the asteroid field. The pod was quiet again. The hatch hissed open and Zur stepped in. His expression was unreadable, but his tone was different. Less contempt. More calculation. "You fight like you've done this before." "I haven't," Ethan said. "Shall you?" You just stared at him for a long moment before turning away. "That is what worries me." Back on the bridge, Koresh met Ethan's gaze for a moment too long. "Efficient under pressure," he said softly, almost to himself. Then louder, "Return to your quarters." Ethan walked out, the hum of the ship's engine steady beneath his feet. But in his mind, the question wouldn't leave him. Why had they been so sure he could do that? Before he even tried, the Vorath warship sailed in silence. its massive frame gliding between the cold stars. Days had passed since the Dravik ambush, but the memory of the fight lingered in Ethan Cole's mind. I still didn't understand how he'd reacted so fast in that gunnery pod, or why Koresh had been so certain he could. The crew treated him differently, now less openly hostile, but more watchful, like they were waiting for something. That watchfulness was starting to gnaw at him. It was in the way Zur would pause mid-task to glance his way, or how Hecta's mandibles clicked when he entered the bridge, her compound eyes reflecting more than simple curiosity. The crew's stares weren't just about suspicion. They were about expectation, and Ethan hated not knowing why. That was why. When he passed a Voreth crewman working near a sealed bulkhead in one of the lower decks, he slowed his steps. The Voreth moved away to fetch tools, leaving the access panel unlocked. The faint hum of machinery and a dim red light spilled from the narrow gap in the door. Ethan glanced both ways down the corridor. No one was watching. He slipped inside. The air was cooler here, drier. The walls were smoother. Lacking the organic, vein-like patterns that covered the rest of the ship, it felt older, less alive, more like a traditional vessel. He followed the faint light until he reached a room no bigger than a freight container. In the center sat a tall, cylindrical module with faint blue glyphs crawling across its surface. A control panel jutted from the base, Kalian symbols shifting like liquid across its interface. He didn't understand the Vorath language, but he knew tech well enough to spot a security lock, and he also knew how to bypass one, at least enough to get himself into trouble. He pulled out the small multi-tool he kept in his pocket and started working the panel. After a few tense minutes, the glyphs flickered, then resolved into galactic. Trade tongue. The first words made his pulse quicken. Project, human classification, prime anomaly asset. Ethan scrolled through the file. The text was fragmented, as if parts of it had been deliberately erased. What remained made little sense, still it did. Human subjects exhibit rapid adaptive response to hostile environments. Baseline aggression threshold exceeds most known species by 300%. Decision-making prioritizes success over survival in high-stress scenarios. His mouth went dry. There were battle logs centuries old describing humans turning the tide of wars against impossible odds, ships destroyed, fleets routed, missions completed with casualty rates that should have ended in total failure. The final entry made him freeze. Project terminated. Risk level. Unacceptable reason. Asset. Unpredictable. Cannot be controlled. Too dangerous to deploy, except in extreme circumstances. Ethan stared at the words, a chill creeping up his spine. The Vorath didn't see humans as allies, or even just crew. They saw them as weapons, volatile ones. Might destroy the enemy or their own side without warning. That was why Koresh had recruited him. Not because of skill, not because of loyalty, because the captain wanted a weapon the galaxy had decided was too dangerous to use. A faint hiss came from the doorway. Ethan turned. Koresh Voon stood there, his golden eyes fixed on Ethan, his expression unreadable. "You've been busy," the captain said, his voice a low rumble. Ethan forced himself to meet his gaze. "What is this? Some kind of Voreth war story, or a warning label?" Gresh stepped into the room, the bulk of his armor almost filling the space. "It is a record," he said, "and a truth the galaxy prefers to forget. You treat humans like some kind of unstable bomb," Ethan said. "Why?" Koresh's mandibles shifted slightly, maybe amusement, maybe something darker. "Because you are. You are a species that fights even when there is no chance to win. You adapt faster than reason allows. You are dangerous." Ethan took a step forward. "Dangerous enough to save Haven Reach." Koresh's eyes narrowed. "If you survive long enough to reach it." For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then Koresh reached past Ethan and shut down the console, the glyphs vanishing into darkness. "Leave this place," the captain said, "and do not return without my order." Ethan walked out, the echo of those words and the weight of the file. Still in his mind, he wasn't just part of the crew, he was the mission. The Voreth warship was running silent, its its engines barely a whisper as it glided through a stretch of empty space between trade routes. Ethan Cole sat in his cabin, staring at the faintly glowing implant on his wrist. It itched, but not in a physical way, more like it was a reminder he couldn't ignore. He could feel the crew's eyes on him wherever he went, the weight of their expectations pressing in. He was still thinking about the file he'd found, the human project. The centuries-old battles, the warning that humans were too dangerous to control. Every part of him wanted to believe it was just military propaganda, a half-truth, to make soldiers feel important. But the look in Koreshvan's eyes when he'd caught him in that room told him otherwise. The ship shuddered suddenly.
Atta.
Slow, even hum of hyperspace turbulence. This was sharp, violent, like something had slammed into the hull. Then the alarm began to howl. The lights shifted from dim silver to a pulsing crimson. Ethan was already on his feet when the comm system crackled to life with Koresh's voice. Boarders. All crew to defense stations. Repeat, Dravik raiders on deck. Ethan grabbed the small blaster from his locker and bolted into the corridor. The air was charged with tension. Vorath crew members rushed past him, some armed with energy rifles, others with weapons that looked more like living things than machines. The sound of combat echoed through the ship's sharp bursts of gunfire, the hiss of plasma discharges, the guttural roars of alien throats. He rounded a corner and almost ran straight into a fight. A Dravik soldier, tall, lean, with segmented armor plates and a cruel, insectoid face, lunged at him. Ethan fired without thinking. The blaster bolt hit the creature's chest, but it barely slowed. It swiped at him with a clawed hand, knocking him hard against the wall. Pain flared through his ribs, but adrenaline drowned most of it out. He ducked the next strike, came up inside the Dravik's reach, and jammed the blaster under its chin before pulling the trigger. The alien collapsed in a twitching heap. The corridor behind him erupted in more gunfire. Ethan turned in time too. See Hecta, the insectoid navigator, leap onto a Dravik attacker and drive her serrated forelimbs into its neck. She clicked something in her own language at him. He didn't need a translator to know it meant move. They pushed toward the bridge together. The ship shook again, this time from internal detonations breach charges tearing open bulkheads. The Dravik weren't here to capture the ship. They were here to kill. By the time they reached the main command chamber, the room was chaos. Vorath crew fought tooth and claw with Dravik boarders. Sparks showered from damaged consoles. The great viewport was cracked in one corner, spiderwebs of fractured material glowing faintly under the stress. Koresh stood at the center, his armor splattered with alien blood. In one clawed hand, he held a Vorath blade that hummed with an inner vibration. He fought with deliberate, lethal movements, each strike leaving another enemy on the floor. Ethan ducked under a flying piece of debris and fired into the melee, dropping a Dravik who had slipped past the captain's guard. For the first time, Ethan saw something in those golden eyes not controlled. Not cold calculation, but urgency. Human, Koresh said, striding toward him, cutting down a Dravik without looking. Now you see why you are here. Ethan's chest was heaving. Said you needed me to help. You didn't say I told you humans are dangerous, Koresh cut in. Do you know why? It is not your speed. It is that you do not stop. You will throw yourself into fire if it means winning. That is what I need. Ethan shook his head. You're talking about suicide missions? Yes, Koresh said without hesitation. And you are the only one on this ship who will succeed in one. Before Ethan could answer, another explosion rocked the bridge. The Dravik began to pull back, their forces retreating toward the breach points. But Ethan could see they had caused massive damage. Sections of the ship were venting atmosphere. Corridors twisted and broken. Koresh's voice dropped to a low rumble. The mission will come soon. When it does, you will do what no Vorath, no Dravik, no other species will. No. You will take the risk no one else will take. And if you fail, its gaze locked onto Ethan's. Billions will die. Last of the Dravik were pushed off the ship. The alarms shifted from attack warning to damage control. But the silence left in their wake was heavier than the noise had been. Ethan holstered his blaster. but his hands wouldn't stop trembling. Not from fear of the Dravik, but from the knowledge that Koresh wasn't bluffing. Whatever was coming next would make this fight look like a warm-up. The Vorath warship prowled through the deep void like a predator, its scarred hull still bearing scorch marks from the last encounter. Ethan Cole sat on the edge of his narrow bunk, staring at the dull light on the ceiling. Every creak and hum of the ship seemed louder now, sharper, like it was waiting for something. He couldn't get Koresh. Vaughn's words out of his head. "You are the only one who will take the risk no one else will take." That wasn't a compliment. It was a sentence. The alarm hit without warning. A low, wailing tone reverberated through the walls, followed by the ship's lights bleeding from silver to a deep, throbbing red. The voice of the Vorath first officer roared over the coms in their guttural language. Too fast for Ethan's implant to fully translate. He caught only fragments. Breach. Multiple decks. Boarding party. Then Koresh's voice came on, calm but sharp. "Dravik Raiders. They are inside. All Kurapel boarders." Ethan grabbed his blaster from the locker. His pulse was already up, adrenaline surging. He'd never liked waiting for trouble to come to him, and here, trouble was only a few corridors away. He swung into the hall and found it alive with movementalian crew rushing past. Armored and armed, with an assortment of weapons. Some carried rifles that spat blue fire, others blades that vibrated like they were alive. The smell of ozone and something metallic was already in the air. The first Dravik came around the corner in a rush tall. Skeletal frames wrapped in black. Segmented armor. Faces hidden behind sharp insectoid masks. Ethan fired without thinking. His first shot dropped one, but the second leapt over the body, claws flashing. He ducked the swipe, slammed the butt of his blaster into the alien's throat, and fired point blank. It collapsed in a twitching heap. Another scream tore through. The hull hype, pitched, animalistic. Hecta, the insectoid navigator, burst from a side corridor, grappling with a Dravik nearly twice her size. Her serrated limbs slashed deep into its armor until it crumpled. Without missing a beat, she clicked at Ethan an urgent sound that clearly meant move. They pushed together toward the bridge. Every deck they passed littered with signs of battle blood smeared across bulkheads, smoke curling from ruptured panels. Vorath warriors locked in close combat. The ship's deck plates trembled from explosions somewhere deeper inside. When they reached the command chamber, chaos was already waiting. The Dravik had forced their way in, their black-armored forms moving like a swarm. Fought in brutal, efficient bursts, blades and energy fire cutting through the attackers. The main viewport flickered with warning glyphs as shield integrity dropped. Koresh Vaughn was in the center of it all. His armor was scarred, his 4 golden eyes locked on the battle. His clawed hands moved with lethal precision, each strike ending another life. A Dravik warrior broke through the defense line, charging straight for him. Ethan didn't think he just moved. He fired twice, the bolts punching through the aliens. Back Koresh glanced at him. And for the first time there was something other than cold calculation in the captain's eyes. "Now," Koresh said, voice low but commanding, "you see why you are here?" Ethan's chest heaved. "You said you needed me. You didn't say I told you. Humans are dangerous." Koresh cut in, slashing down another attacker without looking. "Not because you are stronger, not because you are faster, but because you do not stop. You will dive into fire when all others turn away. That is why I chose you." Ethan shook his head. "You're talking about suicide runs." "Yes," Koresh said flatly. "And you will survive them when no one else can." Before Ethan could respond, a shockwave ripped through the bridge, hurling both of them to the deck. Emergency lights flared, and the cum screamed damage reports from multiple decks. The Dravik began pulling back, their remaining forces retreating through the breach. Koresh didn't give the order to pursue. He just stood there, breathing slowly, his golden eyes locked on Ethan. "When the time comes," the captain said, voice as steady as steel, "you will take the path no Vorath, no Dravik, no other will. And if you fail," his mandibles shifted in what might have been a grimace, "billions will die. The Dravik were gone. The alarm switched to damage control, but the weight in the room was heavier than before. Ethan holstered his weapon, his hands trembling not from fear of the fight, but from the certainty that whatever was coming next would be worse, and Koresh was already counting on him to walk straight into it. The Vorath warship slipped toward the blood rift its hull. Lights dimmed, its engines running at a whisper. Outside, space was no longer black, it was red. The rift wasn't a normal stretch of void. It was a storm of burning light, swirling clouds of crimson and gold twisting in slow, impossible patterns. Whole chunks of shattered ships drifted here. Some so ancient, they were held together only by static charges. Ethan Cole stood on the observation deck, watching the rift pull at the ship's shields. It wasn't just beautiful, it was wrong. The rift had weight in the mind, a constant pressure, like it was staring back. Koresh Vaughn stood beside him, motionless. "Feel it?" the Vorath captain said. It wasn't a question, like standing. "Too close to the edge of a cliff," Ethan replied. "Closer than that," Koresh said, his golden eyes reflecting the rift's shifting colors. "The Dravik keep their most valuable weapon here. We will take it before they can use it." Ethan tore his gaze from the rift. "This is the part where you tell me why this is my job." Koresh didn't smile. Vorath rarely did, but his mandibles flexed slightly, because only a human will survive inside it long enough to succeed. Vorath minds fracture under the rift's pull. Dravik are too. Rigid but you. His gaze locked on Ethan. Humans bend without breaking. That is why you were chosen. The deck trembled. A shadow slid across the viewport of Dravik. Escort ship emerging from the rift's swirling clouds. Then another, and another. The ship's alarms screamed, and the bridge comes snapped to life. Multiple Dravik interceptors. "They have seen us." Koresh turned, his voice a deep command. "Battle stations. Hold them off until Cole is inside." Ethan's blood chilled. "Inside what?" Koresh handed him a small, jagged device, no bigger than a fist. "The weapon's core. It is buried in their station at the rift center. This will destroy it." Ethan looked at the device, then back at the captain. "And how am I getting in?" The deck shook again, harder this time. Vorath gunners were already firing, blue energy bolts cutting through the dark, striking Dravik hulls. But the enemy kept coming. Koresh stepped closer. "A stealth pod will take you through their defenses. After that, you will walk. Walk." Ethan's voice rose. "Through an alien fortress. In this place. While they're actively trying to kill me," "Yes," Koresh said simply. "And if you fail, the Dravik will burn worlds until nothing remains." The ship's shields flared white under a heavy impact. Ethan gripped the device tighter. He could feel the hum of it, like a heartbeat that wasn't his own. In the distance, beyond the battle, the blood rift twisted wider, as if opening to swallow him whole. Ethan knew this wasn't just a mission. It was a one-way trip, but as the stealth pod doors closed around him, sealing him in the dark, he realized something else. Koresh was right. He was the one who would walk into fire when no one else would, and in the blood rift, fire was everywhere. The stealth pod shuddered as it cut through the last layers of the blood rift's warped clouds. Ethan Cole could feel the heat bleeding through the pod's thin hull. Though the rift's glow wasn't real, fire it was something stranger, older. His visor HUD flickered with static, every system straining under the rift's pull. Then, the target came into view. The Dravik fortress didn't look like it had been built, it looked like it had grown out of the rift itself. Black spires curved upward like talons, their surfaces slick with shifting red light. Massive chains of debris orbited around a trekkage from the hundreds of ships that had tried and failed to reach this place. The pod jolted hard. A voice came over his earpiece, Koresh's voice. "Docking window, 43 seconds. After that, they will see you." Ethan didn't answer. He was too busy watching the fortress loom closer, its outer hull crawling with patrols. The pod's stealth field shimmered as it threaded through narrow gaps between jagged metal fragments. With a dull thud, the pod latched onto the underside of one of the spires. The hatch opened with a hiss, and Ethan dropped into silence so deep it rang in his ears. Inside, the corridors were alive. Veins of faint red light pulsed along the walls. as if the fortress itself had a heartbeat. Every step he took echoed in unnatural ways, stretching into whispers. His breathing was too loud. His own pulse was too loud. The first Dravik patrol came without warning, 3 of them. Armored and silent, their insectoid masks reflecting the rift's glow. Ethan ducked behind a curved bulkhead, waited for them to pass, then moved quickly. His weapon ready? His HUD glitched again, and for a second, the hall around him changed. The walls stretched away into darkness, and shadowy shapes leaned from them, whispering in voices he couldn't understand. He blinked hard, shook his head, and kept moving. The deeper he went, the worse it got. The rift wasn't just light and heat, it was in the mind. It showed him flashes of Earth, of faces he'd known, of mistakes he'd never made. Each image tried to make him stop, to turn around, but he didn't. Finally, he reached it. The weapons core chamber opened before him, a massive sphere suspended in the air, its surface rippling like molten glass. Dravik technicians moved around it, their forms warped by the rift's light. The hum of power in the room was bone deep, pressing into his skull. Ethan pulled the jagged device. From his belt, it pulsed in his hand, resonating with the core like it knew what it was meant to destroy. He moved quickly, staying in the shadows. He slid under a walkway, crawled along a maintenance channel, and reached the core's access node. The device clicked into place with a sound that seemed far too loud. Then the alarms began. The Dravik roared in their high. Alien pitch and weapons fire tore through the air. Ethan fired back, the blue flash of his blaster lighting the red chamber. He didn't stop shooting until the device's timer began counting down 30 seconds. He turned to run. Something blocked his path. The Dravik war leader was massive, its armor etched with symbols that burned with rift light. It didn't speak, it simply charged. The impact slammed Ethan to the deck, his blaster skittering away. Claws slashed where his head had been, sparks raining from the floor. He grabbed a shard of broken plating and drove it into the alien's side. The Dravik howled, staggered, and Ethan lunged for his blaster. Fired 3 times into its chest, and the war leader crumpled. The timer hit 5 seconds. Ethan ran. He didn't remember the exact path back, only the desperate pull toward the exit. The device went off as he dove into the stealth pod, sealing the hatch just as the fortress began to tear apart. From space, the explosion looked like the rift itself had swallowed the fortress whole. The shockwave rippled through the clouds, and for the first time, the rift's light dimmed. On the come, Koresh's voice came through low, steady. "You have done it, Cole." Ethan leaned back in the pod seat, breathing hard. "Hey, you know," he said, voice rough. "This was insane." "Yes," Koresh replied. "And yet, you lived." The pod's navigation engaged, carrying him away from the rift. Behind him, the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy was gone. But in Ethan's gut, he knew this wasn't the end, only proof that the next time the job they had for him would be even worse.